Welcome to the Wisdom That Breathes channel. Across all our platforms, we try to share wisdom which is relevant and accessible to everyone. But on this particular platform, we go deeper into some of the ancient principles found within the scriptures. If you find some of the terminology difficult or inaccessible, then go over to our Keshava Swami YouTube channel where you'll be able to find other content which is perhaps more relatable. Thank you and enjoy the wisdom that breathes. So Hare Krishna, thank you everyone for coming. Oh, thank you. Thank you. So we have some time in the next few days, looking forward to the association here. Radhadesh is always a very beautiful place to contemplate and introspect. I think Radhadesh moves at a different pace as well. I don't know for all of you, but for me, coming in from outside, it has a very beautiful energy. And so I come here not just to do some service, to share with you, but also just to deepen my own spiritual life by being with all of you under the shelter of Shri Shri Radha Gopinath. So thank you so much for accepting me, inviting me. And what we thought we'd do for the next 4 evenings is just meditate on one of the most beautiful gifts that Srila Prabhupada gave us, of course, that Krishna gave us, and that Srila Prabhupada delivered to us. It's said that many millenniums ago, Krishna, he blessed the world because the water of the Ganges touched his feet and then flowed into the universe, and it became what we know today as the river Ganga. And it said that anyone who bathes in the Ganges, then just because they flowed from the lotus feet of the Lord, then anyone who bathes in the Ganges, they also go flowing back to the lotus feet of the Lord. But then it said that that same Ganges came to the world in Dwapara Yuga, but this time it didn't flow from Krishna's feet, it flowed from Krishna's mouth. Because that Ganga water flowed from Krishna's mouth as the words of the Bhagavad-Gita. And therefore it said that anyone who bathes their mind, their consciousness, Jalashnanam dine dine Gita Shakrid Bhashi Shnanam, one who bathes in the words of the Gita, then they flow back to the smiling face of Krishna. Incidentally, do you know how the Ganga appears in Kali Yuga? It doesn't appear through the feet of the Lord, it doesn't appear from the mouth of the Lord, but it appears from the eyes of the Lord, because Lord Chaitanya cries in Krishna Prem, in the Sankirtan of the holy names, and therefore anyone who drowns themselves in the chanting of the holy names and experiences those tears flows back to Lord Chaitanya's heart. So by all means, bathe in the Ganga, read the Bhagavad-Gita, and drown in the holy name of Krishna. Don't drown in the Ganga. You can also. So the Gita is very, very beautiful. Another commentator says that all the Vedas are like a forest. And every flower is like the Upanishads, are like the flowers in that forest. And the Bhagavad-Gita is like a garland. It's like the choice flowers from all the Upanishads, the most beautiful conclusions of Siddhanta are contained within the Bhagavad-Gita. And therefore is glorified. Lord Shiva says, Sarvapanishado gavo dogda gopalanandana parthavatsa sudhir bhokta dugdam gitam ritam mahat. That if you compare Sarvapanishado gavo, if you compare all of the scriptures to a cow, Dugda Gopalanandana, then Gopal, Krishna, he is the Dugda, he's milking that cow. Partha Vatsa, Sudhir Bhokta, there's a Vatsa, there's a calf that's drinking the milk that's coming out of that cow. And what is that milk? Dugdam Gitam Ritam Mahat, that milk which is coming from the cow of the Sarvapanishado, all the scriptures, the essence is the Bhagavad-Gita. And therefore there cannot be any greater scripture to absorb one's mind and heart in. Actually everything, of course, there is an expansion of the Gita and the Siddhanta and all the other elevated scriptures. But the Bhagavad-Gita, Srila Prabhupada says, contains everything. And so Shastra is very, very powerful. We travel the world and we share the Shastra with everyone. And here, I'd like to share with you why Shastra is so important. Everyone is seeing the world in a certain way. Everyone has what we call a darshan. Darshan, when we think of darshan, we think of seeing the deities. But darshan or drishya means to see. So everyone has a particular vision of life. That's why two people can be going through exactly the same thing. Two people can be seeing exactly the same thing, but they have a very, very different perception and experience of the situation. That's because each of us have our own vision of life. And our vision, we can say, for most people is broadly made up of two things. One is our condition. We each enter into this world with a certain nature. We're wired to think in a certain way. We have a certain psychology. We have certain fears, certain inhibitions, certain skepticisms, certain hopes, a certain way of decoding things. We're triggered by different things because each one of us have a nature. And that makes up our vision. But it's also said that each one of us have an interaction. We're brought up in this world. Our parents, the people that surround us, the experiences we go through in our childhood, and all of this is said to be nurture. So this also molds our vision of life. Whatever a child goes through early in their life, it often stays with them. And for most people, they think that their vision of life is fixed, that they can't change it because their condition and interaction has happened already. But what we understand through the acharyas is that there's one thing which can even alter one's condition and one's interaction. There's something which can even trump one's nature and one's nurture and evolve one's vision, and that is one's connection. One's connection with Shastra and sadhus. This is why studying scripture, hearing from saintly people is so powerful, because it changes the one thing that changes everything else. You can't change the world, you can't change other people, you can't change what happens around you, but the one thing you can change is your own vision and perception. And therefore, if there's one thing that's worth investing your time and energy in, it's in upgrading and uplifting your own vision, because that will determine the quality of everything else. And therefore, this was done every single day. It's just a part of spiritual culture that every day you absorb yourself in scripture, because this is the most important gift that we have. So if sometimes you feel like I'm this kind of mindset, or I'm this kind of psychology, I am a negative person, I am an envious person, or I'm always, I have this inner critic that stops me, scripture can change everything, but it means one really has to absorb it. And so the greatest gift of the spiritual teachers is to give us this Shastra. Maya mugdha jivara nahi svata Krishna gyan, jivare kripaya koile Krishna Veda Puran. He said in the Shastra that Maya mugdha, the spiritual souls, the living entities, are confused. They don't know what to do, how to contend with life. But out of mercy, Jivare Kripaya Koile Krishna Veda Puran, the Vedas, the Puranas, and all the corollary literatures are given. And the Bhagavad-Gita is the essence of all of those scriptures. So, these scriptures are very, very powerful. But the problem often happens that scripture comes to the world, but there are certain difficulties. Because what happens over time is that scripture becomes inaccessible. It's lost, it's hidden away, it's not accessible to the average person. And therefore, although this unique gift of Shastra is kind of present in the world somewhere, most people don't have access to it. But even if they do have access to it, the next problem that occurs in Shastra or scriptures is that over time what can happen is it can become inaccurate. It's changed, it's modified, it's interpolated, it's extrapolated. Sometimes there's displacement, movement of facts within the scripture. So then the accuracy of the scripture is lost, and if the accuracy is lost, then its potency is also diminished. But then what happens is, even if it's accessible and accurate, most people don't have the intelligence to understand its relevance and how it relates to daily life, because they don't have a teacher who can actually deliver that connection to them, to explain, this is what the scriptures say, this is your situation, and this is the connection. Because Guru Sadhu Shastra Vakya Chitete Koriya Aikya, you can't understand scripture alone. You must understand it with Guru and Sadhu. And even if there are teachers who can show you the relevance, there are only a very few teachers who can make it practical. And so what happens oftentimes is that even if a scripture is accessible, accurate and made relevant, still people may not understand how to live it and practice it in their life. Unless these things can be overcome, one will not see the relevance of scripture in their life. One will not utilize the gift. And when you begin to look at this framework, then you see why Srila Prabhupada is such an exalted personality. Because what he basically does is decodes this whole thing and makes it like this. He makes it accessible, he makes it accurate, he makes it relevant, and he makes it practical. And then, if we take the time to then access that, then our vision is upgraded. And that vision allows us to achieve the goal of life. Most people are seeing through their senses and through their sentiments. Most 99.9% of people see life through their senses and their sentiments. And that's exactly what Arjuna is doing at the beginning of the Bhagavad-Gita, because the very first chapter is known as Shainya Darshan, observing the armies. And he's observing the armies, but he's only observing through his senses, his eyes, and through his sentiments, his mind. And therefore, what does he say? Vepatuscha sharire me romaharshascha jayate gandivam shramshate hastat tvakcheva paridayate. He says, my body is shivering, my skin is burning, my bow, the gandiva, is slipping from my hand. I only see causes of misfortune. Depressed, Krishna, I don't know what to do in my life. This is what happens when you're only able to see life through your senses and your sentiments. So then what does Krishna do? He teaches him to see through Shastra, Jnana Chakshush, see through the eyes of Shastra. So then Krishna begins to give him knowledge. Knowledge of the soul, knowledge of the world, knowledge of God, knowledge of reality, knowledge of karma. And when Arjuna becomes purified by that knowledge, Nastamoha smrite labdva tvatprasadat mayachyuta stitosmi gata sandeha karishye vachanam tava. Then Krishna begins to see through the soul. He begins to see the world as a soul. Srila Prabhupada writes in the Bhagavad-Gita, the yogis who see with the vision of eternity. So who is seeing life with the vision of eternity? As we walk through this world, most people are not seeing. They're seeing through the vision of superficiality, the vision of temporality. They're seeing through a very material vision. So this is the elevation of the Gita. See beyond the senses, see beyond the sentiments, see through Shastra, and then ultimately see through the soul. And that is possible, not just for Arjuna, it's also possible for us, because Srila Prabhupada has made the Gita available for us. So what we're going to do over the next few days, I'm going to show you different angles to the Gita, and how powerful the Gita is in so many different realms. But today what I thought we'd just do, because I've never heard this myself given in a seminar, so I thought it might be interesting, is just to look at the history of the Gita and how the Gita comes to us today in front of us, the Bhagavad-Gita as it is. So I'm going to look at 3 parts of the history of the Gita: the cosmic history of the Gita, the commentarial history of the Gita, and then the contemporary history of the Gita. And then hopefully by the end of today you'll understand how this beautiful knowledge has come to all of us. So what is the cosmic history of the Gita? We know that the Gita was spoken 5,000 years ago by Krishna to Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. But how did it come down? What's the original history of it all? Here, if you look on the screen, some months ago I went to see one Sanskrit scholar. So he was showing me, these are some original manuscripts of the Bhagavad-Gita. These ones are dated to about maybe 400 years old or something like that. And very, very beautiful, very, very accurate, like a work of art. And then he showed me another one. This is very amazing. This is the whole Gita written on these scripts. It's all written in pure gold, 24 karat gold. And it's amazing because every single page of the Gita has a unique border. So you see the border here. And then here's another border. So they're all different. They're all done in artwork like this. So that you can actually see these are 400 or 500 years old in India. There are also older manuscripts of the Bhagavad-Gita. So we're very, very fortunate that this tradition of the Gita being carried through the written manuscripts continues even today, and we have access. Therefore today is one of the rare scriptures that if you read any translation, it doesn't matter whether it's by this group or that group, the Sanskrit matches everywhere. No one has any discrepancy on the Sanskrit. The Sanskrit is the same, the English may be different, we'll talk about that later. But the Sanskrit is the same everywhere because it was carefully passed down like this. So Krishna explains that he speaks we know that Krishna speaks the Bhagavad-Gita to Arjuna. And in the beginning of the Gita, then we see at the end of the introduction, Srila Prabhupada writes this as the progression. That this is how the Bhagavad-Gita was passed down over time. And then people often ask the question, like, it doesn't make sense in the 4th chapter of the Gita where Krishna is talking about the history of how this scripture came down. What does he say? Imam vivashvate yogam proktavan aham avyayam manurikshvakave pravam manurikshvakave bravit. He says, in the beginning I instructed it to Vivashvan, the sun god. And then the sun god instructed it to Manu. And then Manu instructed it to Ikshvaku. And then it began coming down like this. But then when we see this disciplic succession, then we see something very different. It seems to be going from Krishna to Brahma to Narad to Vyas. Krishna says, I'm speaking it to you, Arjuna, because the disciplic succession is lost, and now I'm speaking it to you to re-establish that disciplic succession. But then the question arises, where is Arjuna's name here then? Why doesn't he appear in the disciplic succession? So this is a question that many, many people have. So this is an important point to understand, that spiritual knowledge comes down in 2 lines. There is a seminal line that spiritual knowledge appears in this world through, and there is a spiritual line. The seminal line is known as Shukra, and the spiritual line is known as Shotra. So the seminal line means Krishna to Vivashvan to Manu to Ikshvaku, and then passed down, because Manu, Ikshvaku, these are the leaders of society, the saintly kings. So one way in which the Bhagavad-Gita comes down in the world is through the genealogical, seminal, what we call the material line, from kings to their descendants, to their descendants, to their descendants, and that's one way in which knowledge comes down. The other way in which knowledge comes down, Tene Brahma Rida Yaadikavaye Muyanti Yat Surayaha. Krishna at the beginning of creation gives knowledge to who? Brahma. Tene Brahma Rida. He imparted knowledge within the heart of Brahma. And then Brahma has his sons. Narad becomes the main link, who then teaches Vyas, and then that comes down. And this is known as the spiritual line. So the knowledge of the Bhagavad-Gita is coming down in both of these lines. And therefore the personalities that receive the knowledge in the seminal line are the Raja Rishis, the kings, and the personalities who pass on the knowledge in the spiritual line are the gurus and the saints. And the current status of the seminal line is that it's very weak now. That line of knowledge has been lost because culture has practically been annihilated. But the spiritual line still exists. And therefore, if one wants to receive the knowledge of the Bhagavad-Gita, then it's still available through the spiritual line. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada writes this in the 3rd canto. The line of disciplic succession from Brahma is spiritual, whereas the genealogical succession from Manu is material. But both are on the progressive march towards the same goal of Krishna consciousness. So everyone understands? Krishna instructed the Bhagavad Gita to Vivashvan. Yeah, and then Vivashvan instructed it to Manu, Vaivashvata Manu. We're currently in the Manu of Vaivashvata Manu. And then what happens in Treta Yuga of the cycle that we're in, Vivashvan instructs it to, Vaivashvata Manu instructs it to Ikshvaku. And therefore Srila Prabhupada says in the 4th chapter that the Bhagavad Gita has been present in society for 2 million years, like that. Does this make sense? Anyone have any questions on this before I move forward? So this is the 2 ways in which we're understanding the Bhagavad Gita comes down. Yeah? So when Krishna speaks it to Arjuna, he speaks it because that line from Ikshvaku gets lost. So then what Krishna does is 5,000 years ago, he speaks it to Arjuna, so that Arjuna, then Parikshit, that line can be established again. But when Krishna speaks it to Arjuna, then who records it? Vyas. Vyas records it because Vyas notes down everything in the Mahabharata, and the Bhagavad Gita is 1 chapter of the Mahabharata, and therefore Bhagavad Gita that Krishna spoke to Arjuna, although it's spoken in the seminal line, it appears then that knowledge in the spiritual line because Vyas writes it down, and then it's passed down from Vyas here, from Krishna. Then it's passed down from Vyas to Madhva to Padmanabh to like that, all the way down. So this is the original cosmic history of the Bhagavad Gita. It appears in this world through both of these lines. So if you want to read more about this, then Srila Prabhupada explains everything in the first purports of the 4th chapter of the Gita, where the history of the Gita is delineated by Krishna himself. Evam parampara praptam imam rajarshayo vidu. That Gita must be understood through this line. So that's the kind of original cosmic history of how the Gita appears in this world. But then what happens is that the Gita, the Shastra, Krishna's words are actually non-different from Krishna. Anavrita Shabda, Anavriti Shabda, the Vedanta Sutra says. So the words of Krishna are unlimited, just like Krishna. An ancient verse of Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami tells us, Krishna Tulya Bhagavata Vibhu Sarvashrai Prati Shloke Prati Akshare Nana Arthakai. That the words of the Bhagavata or the Bhagavad Gita, these are unlimited, just like Krishna. Therefore, Prati Shloke, in every verse, Prati Akshare, in every syllable, Nana Arthakai, there are unlimited meanings. And therefore what happens is once the Gita is spoken and the Gita appears in the world, then what happens is there are many, many different commentaries which begin to take place, where different individuals begin to expound different meanings and different layers and different secrets of what Krishna has actually said in this conversation. And some of the earliest commentaries are from the four Vaishnava Acharyas, so Madhvacharya, Ramanujacharya, Shankaracharya, Vishnu Swami. All of these individuals, they all commentate on the Bhagavad-Gita. There's a very good website on the internet, bhagavad-gita.org. And if you go there, you can click on any verse of the Bhagavad-Gita and you can see all the main commentaries that are given on each verse. Because each of the commentators, they give their own unique angle. They don't always agree. Sometimes they have different opinions. But that's okay. It's okay to sometimes also have different opinions, because one thing can be seen from many different angles. One American writer says, if two people agree on everything, then one of them is useless. But he says if two people disagree on everything, then both of them are useless. So the acharyas are like that. Sometimes they have transcendental disagreements, or not disagreements, but different versions of how to understand different things. But that serves to illuminate different angles of vision. So this is very, very wonderful. The Gita comes, Krishna, just 700 verses. They say 45, 46 minutes he spoke. But then this knowledge begins to expand through the commentaries of the acharyas. They give deeper and deeper insights and more layers of understanding. And then it's said that after the Vaishnava acharyas commentate on the Gita, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and the Goswamis, they don't really commentate on the Gita. They use the Gita. If you look at the Goswamis, if you look at Jiva Goswami, he very much references the Gita. Rupa Goswami very much references the Gita, but they themselves don't actually commentate on the Gita. But then the next major commentaries on the Gita are in the 17th and 18th centuries, and those are the commentaries by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and by Baladev Vidyabhusan. And when Srila Prabhupada was translating his Bhagavad Gita as it is, then he very much used these commentaries as the basis for writing his Bhaktivedanta purports. And so, like this, there are more and more commentaries. So these are the very beautiful commentaries that are there. The Gita is a living book, so there can even be more and more illuminations on the Gita as time goes by. It's a living theology. And so as long as one looks at the text of the Gita, follows in the line of the teachers, and offers different illuminations, as long as it's in the line of the teachers, there's no problem with that. However, what happens after some time is that in India, the Gita begins to be commentated on by different individuals who maybe have their own purposes or their own ideas or their own conceptions of what Krishna is saying in the Gita, and therefore they use it sometimes in a nice way, but sometimes for an extraneous purpose as well. On the left hand side you have a very, very popular commentary on the Gita called Bhagavad-Gita Rahasya. This was written by someone called Bal Gangadhar Tilak, and he was one of the kind of forces behind the nationalist movement of India to liberate India from British rule. And he very much used the Gita, and specifically this kind of notion of war and doing your duty and karma yoga, acting dutifully without attachment, and the kind of rally call that Krishna gives to Arjuna to fight in the war. And he very much used the Bhagavad-Gita and this kind of angle to kind of encourage the Indians to kind of fight back against British rule and free themselves from that subjugation. So you begin to see here now how the Bhagavad-Gita is being taken from a spiritual context, and now it's being used in perhaps somewhat of a more political way. And then Gandhi, of course, Gandhi did many, many beautiful things and many nice things, and he said many nice things about the Gita. But Srila Prabhupada also noted that Gandhi, his main mission was ahimsa and this philosophy of non-violence. And Gandhi also used the Bhagavad-Gita to try to claim that it supports this philosophy of non-violence. And Srila Prabhupada said that wasn't entirely correct, obviously, because here is Krishna on the battlefield telling Arjuna to fight. And so Gandhi, what he does is he takes the Bhagavad Gita more metaphorically, and he says it's not that we should take this so literally, but the battle, the war, the fight is more of an internal thing, and therefore he gives his own unique perspective on things. So over time what happens is you can begin to see how these pure spiritual teachings, then gradually what can happen over time is they can become contaminated and they can become somewhat compromised. But the Bhagavad Gita doesn't just stay in India. On the left hand side you see this is the first ever translation of the Bhagavad Gita in the Western world. It was done by someone called Charles Wilkins in I think something like 1730 or 1735, something like that. And he was one of the very first person to translate the Bhagavad Gita into English. And it was from him that other like American transcendentalists, like you've heard the names like Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, all of these individuals, they got inspired by Wilkins's commentary. And then it began to spread, Bhagavad Gita began to spread throughout the Western world. And then after that in the Western world, it captured the imagination of many, many European, American thinkers, and there were so many different translations. The one on the left is perhaps one of the most popular ones today. And now in the West, in English, there are like hundreds of versions of the Bhagavad Gita. So this is the kind of middle period of the Bhagavad Gita, the different commentaries that came about from the Bhagavad Gita. But then, now let's look at the contemporary history, and specifically Srila Prabhupada's Gita, and how the Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita as it is, how does that come to us? So Srila Prabhupada, he arrived in America in 1965. Now the interesting thing is that when Srila Prabhupada came to America, he didn't bring the Bhagavad Gita with him. He brought the Srimad Bhagavatam with him. But it's important to understand that even though Srila Prabhupada had brought the Bhagavatam with him, he wanted to publish the Gita as soon as possible. Actually, it's said that in 1939, he had written a significant introduction to the Bhagavad Gita, which later was printed. And it said actually that in India, Srila Prabhupada had actually translated the whole Bhagavad Gita, and it was over 1,000 pages long, but that manuscript was stolen, unfortunately. So Srila Prabhupada, he had actually translated the Gita already, but because the manuscript was stolen, he couldn't print it. And therefore he continued on with the Bhagavatam. He printed the Bhagavatam. He came to America in 1965. But if you look at Srila Prabhupada in 1965, what he's doing in New York is he's actually working on his translation of the Bhagavad-Gita. In 1966, while Srila Prabhupada is working on his translation of the Gita, unfortunately in New York his typewriter gets stolen, so it's another setback. But then in 1967, Srila Prabhupada completes his translation of the Bhagavad-Gita. So Lord Prabhupada didn't come to America with the Bhagavad-Gita. By 1967, he had actually translated the entire Bhagavad-Gita. And Srila Prabhupada wanted it to be printed. Now Srila Prabhupada, he named his Bhagavad-Gita as it is because he was seeing all of these other versions of the Gita that I just showed you, all of those ones in English, and he was seeing that there was a major lacking. And therefore he named his Bhagavad-Gita as it is for a few reasons. And this is why Srila Prabhupada's Gita is so powerful. The first thing is Srila Prabhupada's Gita carries authority. Because in the Bhagavad-Gita, Krishna himself teaches how the Bhagavad-Gita should be learnt. And the first thing Krishna says is it should be learnt in parampara, from a teacher who is in parampara. And what is the qualification for one to be in the parampara? Sa evaya maya tedya yoga prokta puratana bhakto sime sakha cheti rahasyam hyatadutamam. Krishna says that this supreme science of the Bhagavad Gita can only be understood by those who are devoted, by those who are actually devotees. So unless you're a devotee, you can't understand the Bhagavad Gita. Unless you live it, unless you breathe it, unless you apply it in your life, unless you take seriously what Krishna says and you change the way you interact with everything, you can't actually understand the Bhagavad Gita, and therefore you can't be in parampara. And if you're not in parampara, then you can't teach the Gita. And if you're not in parampara and someone learns from you, they won't actually be able to understand what the goal of this literature is. So Srila Prabhupada is looking at all the other versions, he's saying, but they're not in parampara. And it's not a sectarian statement, because even those authors by their own submission would say they're not devotees of Krishna. But they're just translating it as an intellectual, a poetic book, and therefore the essential meaning cannot come out. So Srila Prabhupada's book is as it is because it has authority. Not just that, Srila Prabhupada said it's as it is because it has transparency. Srila Prabhupada wanted to specifically ensure that every single syllable, every single word, he was showing with transparency how I'm translating it. I'm not misconstruing anything, I'm not adding anything in. You can see this is the translation, but you can see this is how I've translated every single word. And therefore, if anyone wants to trace how Srila Prabhupada arrives at any type of meanings, he's not hiding anything. And therefore, there's complete transparency. And not just that, it's as it is because it gives applicability. It actually tells you what you're supposed to do in your life after reading this book. It's not just an academic book, it's not just about mental gymnastics, it's not just some poetry, but it's actually something that's meant to change you and something that's meant to give you a direct experience of God. And so on these counts, Srila Prabhupada said this is Bhagavad-Gita as it is, because it carries authority, it carries transparency, and it carries applicability. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada said, therefore, practically we can see that so many Bhagavad-Gitas were produced in the world but hardly anyone became a devotee of Krishna. But this Bhagavad-Gita, people read it, because it has purity and because it's coming in parampara, it actually triggers a change of consciousness. So Srila Prabhupada had completed his manuscript of the Bhagavad-Gita in 1967, and so Srila Prabhupada wanted it to be printed. And even that is a very interesting story, because first Srila Prabhupada was trying to get Allen Ginsberg to help to get it printed. Allen Ginsberg was the famous poet, very, very famous in America. He donated Prabhupada a harmonium, he was giving donations, and he was helping the movement in many ways. So Srila Prabhupada told Allen Ginsberg, I've got this manuscript of the Gita, I want you to try and get it printed. But Allen Ginsberg, after 6 months, he gave up. He said, I couldn't find anyone. Then next, Prabhupada asked Raya Ram that you go out and you see, we need to find a publisher for this Bhagavad Gita. At that time, Prabhupada didn't have his own publishing press, the BBT. So Raya Ram wrote to many academic publishers, but they all turned it down. Then Srila Prabhupada came to Brahmananda Prabhu and he said, no one has been able to publish this Bhagavad Gita. I want you to try to publish. Shri Radha Gopinath Ki. I want you to try and publish this Bhagavad Gita. So Brahmananda was like, if Allen Ginsberg couldn't do it, if Raya Ram couldn't do it, like this is so difficult. So he's like going around trying to find someone who will publish this Bhagavad Gita. And even Brahmananda, he's losing faith because he's reading that Bhagavad Gita and he's saying Prabhupada has just brought out the devotional essence. For most people, they just want some poetry, they want some literary art, they want something, but this is very specific, a very specific call to action. I don't know who's going to be interested in this. So Brahmananda Prabhu was baffled what to do. But then one day what happened is at that time the devotees had put the Hare Krishna record out. So different people, they would play that record on their radio stations. So then what would happen is people would write in and order a copy of the record. So on one particular day, Brahmananda was receiving the orders for the record and he saw that someone from Macmillan Publishers had ordered a record. So he came running to Prabhupada. He said, Prabhupada, someone from Macmillan Publishers has ordered a record. So Prabhupada looked at him and Prabhupada said, so don't post the record to them. You go to them personally and you deliver and you tell them that we have a Bhagavad Gita to publish. You should publish it. So Brahmananda Prabhu said, okay, great. So Brahmananda Prabhu said, shall I take some other books so I can show them? Prabhupada said, no. Just tell them you have a Bhagavad Gita to publish. He said, Brahmananda said, but should I take some other information of you or something so that I can make a better case? Prabhupada said, no. Just tell them you have a Bhagavad Gita to publish. So he was thinking like, wow, Prabhupada is convinced here. So the next day he went to the Macmillan Publishers. So he was finding out this person who had ordered the record. And when he found the person who had ordered the record, his heart dropped. Because it was just like an administrative person in the Macmillan company. It was like no one of any stature. So he went to deliver this record to this person, and this is just some like clerk working at the desk. And he's like, oh my God, and I'm going to ask him to publish. He's just a clerk working at the desk. So in his mind he's thinking, oh no, so he's just talking to the person about the record. He's thinking, shall I even ask him? It's going to be a waste of time. This person carries no authority. And then just as they're talking, someone walks through the door, a Mr. Wade, and this person is like the senior publisher of Macmillan. So the clerk says, oh yeah, this is Mr. Wade. He's the senior publisher of Macmillan. So Brahmananda is just thinking like, my God, I saw this guy, now the senior publisher is in front of me. So Brahmananda Prabhu just looks at him and he says, we have a copy of the Bhagavad-Gita to publish. He just tells him like straight, no conversation. And this Mr. Wade, he looks at Brahmananda and he says, you have a complete edition? Written by who? Brahmananda said, an Indian Swami who's currently in New York. He said, an Indian Swami in New York, a complete edition of the Bhagavad-Gita with Sanskrit. The publisher just looks at him and he said, we'll publish it. We are in our religious section, we've published every acclaimed religious book, but we don't have a translation of the Bhagavad-Gita. So we'll publish it. And right there on the spot, no questions asked. So Brahmananda Prabhu went back. He was like so excited, he was jumping for joy. And then he came back and he saw Srila Prabhupada. He said, Srila Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada. You know, amazing news, you know. They've agreed to publish the Bhagavad-Gita. Prabhupada was like, yeah, that's fine. It was almost as if he knew it was all going to happen. And Satyaraj Prabhu, he actually went back many years later to meet this Mr. Wade to confirm the story. And so he writes an article on this and he talks about how he met this senior publisher. And the senior publisher, he confirmed everything. He said it was miraculous. I was waiting for a translation of the Gita. And then this, you know, this monk walks in and he says that actually what happened the very next day after Brahmananda Prabhu came, Srila Prabhupada himself personally came to the Macmillan office and he brought the manuscript. And this Mr. Wade had a very beautiful conversation with him. And so in 1968, the first Bhagavad Gita as it is was printed. Is this one on the left? So they didn't want to print the full 1,000-page manuscript of the Bhagavad Gita. So instead what they told Srila Prabhupada to do was to edit it down. So he had his editors, I think it was Hayagriva and someone else, Hayagriva Prabhu and someone else, and they edited the 1,000-page manuscript down to about, I think, 300 or 400 pages. And what they did is they had Govinda Dasi to make a picture on the front. So Govinda Dasi, she spoke with Srila Prabhupada, and because it was the Vietnam War and all of those things at that time, they decided that they wouldn't do the battlefield scene on the front. So instead, Govinda Dasi, what she did is she printed, she actually made a picture of the universal form with many heads and many, many arms. And when the publishers took that, then they edited the picture and they took like all the heads out, kept one head. They took many of the arms out and they kept 4 arms. Because they thought the universal form was a bit too psychedelic, and so they edited it down to this one. And so Govinda Dasi showed Srila Prabhupada, and Srila Prabhupada said it's okay. Vishnu is a more intimate form than the universal form. So Prabhupada was happy with that. Prabhupada actually, in all of his books generally, you'll see there's something different about these 2 books printed by Macmillan that you'll never see in any of Prabhupada's other books. Do you know what it is? Yeah, Founder Acharya, that's true. But here in these 2, the Macmillan, they put Prabhupada's name beside Krishna. And actually Prabhupada, he never did that in any of his books. He always put his name underneath Krishna. So when Macmillan published this, Prabhupada looked at it and he said, no, they should have put my name on the bottom, underneath Krishna. But then Prabhupada looked at it and he said, it's okay. The Shakti goes on the left of Krishna and the devotee is the expansion of Shakti, so it's okay. So Prabhupada accepted it like that. And this was the first Macmillan edition. So this one on the left was printed in 1968. And then in 1972, because the Bhagavad-Gita was being distributed and sold so widely, then in 1972 they produced the full, complete, unabridged Bhagavad-Gita as it is. Also, by that time Prabhupada had devotees do artwork, so then the artwork also went into that. And in this edition went all the Sanskrit and transliteration and everything. So that's the original 1972 first ever complete Bhagavad Gita that Srila Prabhupada wrote. So it's beautiful just to know this history, because the Bhagavad Gita is such an important book for us, and we see how Srila Prabhupada did all of this. He made it so accessible, accurate, relevant, practical, and practically for the world now. The Bhagavad Gita is like the book we can use to really reach the world. Anything that anyone wants to learn, whether it's lifestyle management or leadership, whether it's relationships or whether it's about science or whatever, anyone wants to learn, is all actually present within the Bhagavad Gita. It's such a versatile book that not only does it give knowledge of the ultimate spiritual reality. Krishna says, Jnanam teham savijnanam idam vakshyami sheshata, that I'm declaring unto you this knowledge of both phenomenal and numinous. So phenomenal means the world, knowledge of this world, and numinous means knowledge of the world beyond. And so this Bhagavad Gita really has all types of knowledge. And in the coming days we'll kind of look at some of the insights of the Gita, some of the applications of the Gita, and how we can use the Gita to really reach people and share with them a very powerful spiritual message. Which is what Srila Prabhupada really came here to do. So I think now the BBT has distributed something in the region of 50 million Bhagavad Gitas, wow, which is amazing, but that's just a drop in the ocean. And so we really want to take it further. So yeah, I just thought today just to begin by giving you a little bit of the background of the Bhagavad Gita. So we've got 5 or 10 minutes. I don't know if anyone has any questions or anything you'd like to ask, or if there are any reflections. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Maharaj. I was just wondering, why is it exactly that the line of the Sampradaya of the Raja Rishis, why it became so weak, whereas the line of the Gurus, of the sages, it remained strong?
Yeah. So why is it that the line of the Raja Rishis became weak, and why is it that the line of the spiritual teachers became strong, or remained strong? The first thing to understand is that there's deviation everywhere in Kali Yuga. So there's also deviation even within spiritual lines. For example, we hear about Advaita Acharya and how some of his sons deviated, or many instances in the different links of the parampara where even the spiritual line can go astray. But in Kali Yuga, it's said that the Raja Rishis, they are more prone. Kali Yuga tends to affect, you see, like when Parikshit was removing Kali, trying to remove the influence of Kali, and then he was about to kill Kali. And then later on, Kali surrendered to Parikshit. And because Kali surrendered to Parikshit, then Parikshit had to give Kali a place to stay. So then there's a verse in the Bhagavatam. Abhyartitastada tasmai stanani kalaye dudo dyutam panam striya suna yatra adharmas chaturvida. So because Kali surrendered to Parikshit, then Parikshit had to give Kali a place to reside. So Parikshit said, Dyutam, wherever there's gambling, Panam, wherever there's intoxication, Striya, wherever there's illicit sex, Suna, wherever there's meat eating. In these places you can reside. But then Kali looked at Parikshit and said, but in your kingdom none of these things are going on. So then where should I reside? And then Parikshit gave him a fifth place to reside. He said, wherever gold is hoarded, wherever there's money, wherever there's treasury. And therefore it said that in Kali Yuga, the Raja, the Rishis, the kings, they were more susceptible to deviation because they were more enamored by wealth, by power, by influence, by position, by prestige, and therefore that intoxicates. And so for example in the Bhagavatam 12th canto you have the Bhumi-gita, and you have Bhumi Devi, Mother Earth, and she's lamenting at how all of the kings have become degraded by their contact with all of these things. And so therefore there was more degradation, and therefore we see even today with politicians and it's very, very leaders of society, because they have so much access to these things, they're not able to maintain their integrity to be pure instruments to continue a pure teaching. Whereas in the spiritual line, because naturally there was more renunciation, there was more detachment, so there was more of a chance of maintaining the purity. And so that could be said to be one of the major reasons that still in the spiritual line integrity was maintained like that. Yeah.
I was wondering about since the Gita is publishing, and like nowadays the yoga scene, the Gita, as far as I understand, and sometimes also the Bhagavad-Gita as it is used as one of the books that the students in teacher training need to learn. And I was wondering if you could say something about, since the Gita is publishing, since Prabhupada's Gita is publishing, and maybe also on the resistance of sometimes of using Prabhupada's Gita versus other Gita versions in the context of the yoga scene typically.
Yeah. Yeah, Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita did undergo some criticism as well by different individuals, because they accused him of just inserting bhakti everywhere. So like for example, when Krishna talks about yagya, then for Srila Prabhupada it's the chanting of Hare Krishna. When Krishna talks about living in seclusion, for Srila Prabhupada it's about living with devotees. When Krishna talks about abhyasa, to control your mind, then for Srila Prabhupada it's Nava Anga Bhakti. So like this, like Srila Prabhupada just brings bhakti everywhere. And not just brings bhakti everywhere, but just a call for surrender, a call for practice. There's one section in the Gita, I think it's in the 8th chapter from text maybe 15 to 25, where in 10 verses Srila Prabhupada gives 9 references to the Hare Krishna mantra, and 6 times he actually writes the Hare Krishna mantra in full. So like he's really telling people like, and therefore some people have criticized that this is like a, how can you call this Bhagavad Gita as it is, because he's just promoting bhakti. Of course we know the answer to that the ultimate culmination of the Bhagavad Gita, yoginam api sarvesham madgatena antaratmana, the culmination of yoga is to develop love for Krishna. So what Srila Prabhupada is doing is just bringing out the essence everywhere. So now when we interface with different audiences, they may not be ready for that essence. They may be looking for something else. They may be just looking for some gyan or some immediate insights. So yes, therefore it's a living tradition. Therefore, Srila Prabhupada never discouraged his devotees from writing. He told them, you should write. You should also present this knowledge according to the needs, interests and concerns of the people of the time, but it must be in parampara. The ultimate message shouldn't be hidden or it shouldn't be skewed. Yet in different versions we can approach that essence in different ways and expertly bring people to that essence of bhakti in a way that's relevant to them. And so definitely I think there's scope for many people to write on the Gita and to present it and to connect people to Krishna's words and then eventually take them to the culmination of it all, which is to develop pure love. So we want to take people on that ultimate journey, and Srila Prabhupada's books will always remain like the bedrock, they will ultimately be the books which will introduce people to that real devotional connection with Krishna. But there can be many other books which build that bridge and make that connection and help people to actually approach it. Because for some people, Srila Prabhupada's tone, sometimes they may have some reservation about that. Yeah.
Thank you, Maharaj. I wanted to ask you about the connection of Bhagavad-Gita spoken by Krishna to Arjuna, and these two lines you explained to us.
And which two lines?
Two lines.
Oh, the two lines?
Yeah.
So you want clarification on that?
Yeah, and Bhagavad-Gita spoken by Krishna to Arjuna is something different?
So one line comes from Krishna to the sun god, to Manu, to Ikshvaku, the Raja Rishi line. And that line, Krishna says, the Raja Rishi line eventually got broken. And so Krishna came 5,000 years ago to teach Arjuna to re-establish that Raja Rishi line. And then after Arjuna was Parikshit, and then after Parikshit was Janamejaya, and then the kings from there. But then gradually those kings again became degraded, and therefore this line is now very weak. But when Krishna spoke to Arjuna, then on the spiritual line side, Vyas, who's the fourth link, he was writing down all the scriptures, so he took that conversation that they had, it came into the Mahabharata, and then it was. So then that's how Bhagavad-Gita is taught in the spiritual line.
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just missed the beginning of the class.
Okay, thank you very much. Shri Shri Radha Gopinath ki, Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Maharani ki, Shri Shri Gauritai ki. So thank you very much. We'll continue tomorrow. Srila Prabhupada ki.